So welcome to today's webinar on the power of meaningful connections. To first introduce myself, my name is Darren Clear, and you might recognise my voice from our Moments That Matter podcast series, which we feature on the Balance to Life platform. And hopefully also you're familiar with the platform itself. We sort of think of ourselves as a bit of a health and wellness professional development tool, if you like. So there's a whole range of information and balance breaks and smart coach modules and things like that you're able to do to sort of help continue to develop your own knowledge of some of the areas of health and wellness that we've been promoting over the last few years. That people like yourselves have had access to the entire platform. So today we're going to be talking, obviously, though, about meaningful connections. And we will be sending some information out after the webinar, including a link to a Smart Coach module itself, and also some other areas within the website that you'll be able to go to just to get some more information on this area. But to start with our traditional acknowledgement of country, I begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land and acknowledging the connections to their land, sea and community. And we pay respect today to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. So straight away there you see the word connections even comes into context when we're doing something like the acknowledgement of country. And I was, in preparation for this, I was reminded of the importance of connections to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I mean, you don't become the longest living civilization on earth without having connections across all tribes as a people. And I was reminded of that in watching the Garn. It's called Slow TV, and it was a documentary following the Garn railway up from Adelaide right up to Darwin, and they went past the area of the song lines that the Aboriginals used to use, song lines, and they'd pass it between tribes to understand where they need to go from a navigational sense. So it just showed to me the importance of connections between the Aboriginal people on mainland Australia and how important that was to keep them as such a long and successful culture and people that they've been across many thousands of years. Now, if you have any questions, post them to the live chat as we go along. We'll get to those either as they arise during the webinar itself, or more likely at the end. We'll have a look at what questions you may have, and we'll pause to do that then. But just understand that within Zoom, there is that feature where you're able to post some questions. And if you're watching this outside of the live webinar, certainly feel free to reach out to us via the platform itself with any questions that you may have in that area. To provide a brief overview, so we really want to, there is obviously a bit of a focus as well as connections on the Are You OK message, because Are You OK coming up on the 9th of September. So we really want to focus a little bit on that. That's going to be part of our intro where we look at, are they really okay? Ask them today. That's the particular message that Are You OK want to focus on for 2021. Then we're going to look at why connections matter. That sort of may seem a bit self-explanatory, but we're going to go a little bit more scientific, and that will lead into talking about the wellbeing spectrum and the science of wellbeing, and sort of look at what is going on in our mind when we connect with people, not only for ourselves, if we are the person that reaches out and connects with someone, but also for the person that we're actually connecting with. And then we're going to look at 3 simple ways to connect. And within that, we're going to have a few little sound bites, if you like, from some podcast conversations that I've had with people on the area of connection and particularly Are You OK over the last year. So the first thing to look at is the Are You OK message itself. So having been involved now myself with Balance to Life for a number of years, I've been a bit closer to the Are You OK Day message from there. And I think it's become more and more important to be conscious of delivering the right message around Are You OK, and making sure that it's not just a matter of saying to people, it's just about reaching out and asking, are you okay? And that's it, dropping the ball and moving on. And I sort of think from our point of view, if we look at it as a KPI, if you like, for Are You OK Day. So your normal KPI would be, just reach out to someone, ask, are you okay? make sure they're all right on that day, and then that's fine. Well, you've met that sort of KPI. If we look at it from a stretch goal, which I'm sure you're probably all familiar with, the stretch goal would be really to make a meaningful connection with someone. And that's where the 2021 message really comes in, because what the Are You OK Day organisation is asking people to do is ask or check, are they really okay? And then ask them today, and try and make it a part of your daily routine where you're actually, or even if it's weekly, checking in with someone and checking in and really making a meaningful connection to feel satisfied in yourself that that person is okay from your conversation. It doesn't even need to be that you've asked them, are you okay, within that particular conversation. It can be just a matter of having reached out, being satisfied that they're in a good place, and knowing what they're doing and where they're at in their week and where they're at in their lives, so to speak. So that's really what we want to do, because but the real sort of underlying message of that, if you like, is that we want people to not underestimate the power of support and the power of support structures to people that are going through a tough time. We can't you can't overstate the importance of professional mental health counselling, obviously, if someone is in a real bad state of depression. But just having support structures in place and having people that are reaching out, and also knowing that if you're depressed yourself, that it is important and beneficial to you to reach out to others, that's a really important message, an essential message for us to try and get across to people as part of Are You OK for 2021. So the two things I really want you to think about from that point of view is, try and use this Are You OK Day message to make a meaningful connection. Try and make it a part of your regular routine, that you are reaching out to people within your social circles and making sure that they're okay. And then also, don't underestimate the power that has, and understand the power that will have for people, not only for yourself if you're going through a tough time, to reach out to others, but also for people within your own sort of sphere of influence, if you like. And the other thing to think about is, it's not necessarily to just trying to reach out to people that you think, well, that person's shown a few signs, and waiting for people to show signs for you to reach out at the time, because there is such a thing that's sort of coming more and more to the front now, which is called smiling depression. And without going into too much detail of it, it's certainly something that you can look up for yourself. But it is about saying to people, and I know from a personal point of view, the people that I've discovered after the fact, or even through talking to them, that have been going through depression in their own lives, are people that probably would have been the last people I would have suspected, because they are happy, outgoing, sort of gregarious personalities, that I would not have linked them to depression. It's sort of, we sort of think of it as more quiet people and introverted people. It's not the case at all, of course. So don't just wait for signs of someone to sort of show outward signs of depression before reaching out. Understand the importance of reaching out to people, no matter what it is, and the importance of, even if it is someone that you haven't spoken to in a while, the power of your support and you reaching out to that person could be just what they needed, even if it's not something that you're expecting at the time. There's a few tips if you are going to reach out, and particularly in a sense from the Are You OK message. So if you have made a decision, look, I'm going to reach out to this person, whether it's a person that you expect is going to be going through some tough times, or a person that you don't really know what's going on in life, you just want to check in, you may not have spoken to for a while. There's a number of things to be aware of, and the Are You OK Day people have shared this with us, and I want to share it with you now, some tips on reaching out to people and making those connections as part of your Are You OK Day KPI, if you like, for 2021. The first one is be present. So that's sort of a bit self-explanatory, but just make sure that you're present in the conversation. And a part of that is choosing an appropriate time and place to actually hold the conversation. So don't do it at the time. Don't do it at the time when you're cooking dinner and you're having a glass of wine, you've got the kids running around, whatever it may be. Make sure that you've got the time and the place to just sit down, give them your full attention, be present within that conversation. Also, if you are aware of something they may be going through, and that's part of your sort of reasoning behind reaching out, don't feel that they're your problem to fix, or that you're making the call with the answers to their problems, because that chances are whatever they're going through, other people have already put particular solutions to them. They may have already thought of that themselves, highly likely they have. Certainly if they ask you for some advice, share it, but don't go in with the mentality of, I need to fix this problem, I've got the magic answer to what you're going through. Just being there, supporting them, listening to them, having a conversation with them is enough. And on that same sort of note, understand that someone's not always ready to talk, so don't force them to talk about the problem. And I'll give you an example in my own life. I know there's a friend of mine that's going through some difficult situations in his personal life, and I just touch base with him every week, but we actually just talk about fantasy football. We don't talk about what's going on all the time. Sometimes it comes up naturally, but most of our discussions are just around fantasy football, which is really a bit nonsensical to the rest of the world, even though we take it quite seriously. But from that point of view, the important thing is just to reach out to him, just to touch base with him. And as I say, occasionally we do get into the more serious aspects of what he's going through, but I wait for him to bring that up and share that with me, rather than me getting on the front foot all the time, because if that's all I wanted to talk about with him, chances are he'd stop taking the calls and say, I don't want to talk about it all the time. So wait for that person to be ready to talk. And the final point is, or the final tip is, check in again. Don't do it as a one-off. Do it as a regular thing, and just keep checking in with that person. And make it, that is obviously part of having a meaningful connection with someone. It's not a meaningful connection if you just say once a year, I'm going to ring you on the same day. I think it's, obviously the more often you're speaking to that person, the more you're able to connect with them. So let's move on now to, and this will sort of, it'll all be it'll all sort of interlink as we go on. But the next part is why connections matter. And as I said at the start, this can be quite self-explanatory, but you really think about it as a means of helping yourself and helping others. And what we want to do as part of that is give you some visualization, actually give you some of the science behind what is going on in your minds when you are, or your mind and the mind of the person you're connecting with, when you're making those connections, whether they're professional or personal in nature. So the first thing we do from a visualization point of view, let's have a look at this well-being spectrum. And there's a little bit of science behind this as well. So we're looking at the well-being spectrum here, and if we focus first on the green part of that diagram, that's where we're flourishing. So that's the peak of well-being. There you have a strong sense of meaning, mastery, you feel like you really matter to others. And we've all hopefully been in this, hopefully very recently, you've sort of been in this green area where you feel like you can take on the world, little setbacks that may happen during the day. Maybe it's your computer crashes early in the day, it just doesn't bother you, you just push straight through it. You feel like you can take on the world in those sort of days. Then you look at the opposite end of the spectrum. That's the red part of that diagram. So that's the valley of ill-being. That's where you're in depression. You feel despondent, drained, worthless. And that is where it is important, if you're in that red area, to reach out and connect with other people, or for us to try and connect with you. And we'll get into why that is the case in those things. And look, again, you've probably all been in that area before. It's important to understand as we move up and down this well-being spectrum that it is natural to be in the red at times in our life. It is natural to be in the green at certain times in our life. So it's not necessarily about saying let's never get into the red, because that is unavoidable. And coming from, I've also done some celebrant work over the years, which has led me into the funeral industry. So from that point of view, I fully understand that it is just part of being human, that we will be in that red zone at different times. And that's when it becomes important for us to reach out to others and people to reach out to us. The part between the green and the red is languishing. So then, and the real risky areas there are the yellow and the orange areas of that diagram. So that's where you're not exactly depressed, but you're not the picture of mental health either, and your motivation might be a bit dull. You might have trouble focusing. Your performance at work might go down, and you'll struggle to sort of display resilience, and things like your computer crashing, you'll take a little bit more time to get over because it'll really frustrate you. And I'm sure, again, we've all had days like this. I used to have days like this, particularly when I worked in the finance sector myself, where you're just not quite 100%. We used to have a name for it. We'd say you're a bit Oscar ordinary, a bit Oliver ordinary, depending on where you sort of sat on that wellbeing spectrum. And oftentimes I'd go down and just grab a coffee in the morning, particularly if I really felt I needed to pick me up. And in preparing for this, I sort of looked back on that and thought, you know what, I used to think it was the caffeine hit that was getting me up and about and ready for the day. But now I look back on it, and it was probably the conversations I was having with the cafe staff, the conversations I was having with other people from my work team who may have gone to the same cafe. They were the sort of things and the connections that I was making in those trips to the cafe that was helping me get through, pick me up and get through the day, rather than that sort of hit of caffeine, which was much more short term, if it was doing anything at all. So so from that point of view, it is important to understand, though, when you're sitting in that yellow and orange area, be able to verbalize your feelings, because the real risk is not necessarily moving up and down this wellbeing spectrum. It is sitting in the one spot for too long, right? Even in the green area. And I don't know about you, but I feel I sort of don't trust people that are happy and up and about all the time, because it's just not natural, okay, to be in that green area at all times. And obviously the real risk is sitting in the orange and the yellow areas, where you lose that little bit of motivation. And the longer you sit in that area, a little bit like the frog in the boiling water, the longer the more risk you take of actually going to that struggling and red area. So it is important to just move up and down that wellbeing spectrum and understand what moves you up and down that wellbeing spectrum. And that's where we really get into the importance of connections and how that can help. So in understanding what connections do and how connections can move you up and down that wellbeing spectrum, let's look at the science of wellbeing. And we've got there some happy chemicals. Before I go into the happy chemicals, and we're going to go into a chemical that's not listed there, but that's more of a chemical of stress, which is cortisol, which you may have heard of. Now, cortisol has served us very well from an evolutionary perspective. So if you think back to the sort of Stone Age, if you like, when there were a lot of threats to man, and there might have been woolly mammoths or something, chasing them around, we had this sort of fight or flight mechanism that would come in to our minds, and that was cortisol kicking in and saying, there's a threat, you need to move and get out of this way, or pick up a stick and fight your way out of this, whatever it might be. Now, obviously today, our threats are very different than what they would have been from an evolutionary point of view, but our brains react in the same way. So when it sees a threat, when it sees a problem that comes in the workplace, this cortisol gets produced, and that can sort of up your stress levels, and your body sort of, you feel under attack, you feel like you're not quite safe, and that's where you move negatively down that well-being spectrum, the more that cortisol is produced. And if you don't offset it with some of these happy chemicals we're going to get to now, that's where you sort of fall into that yellow, orange, red area of the well-being spectrum. But to concentrate here on our happy chemicals, so the first one I'm going to talk about is endorphins. So now that's not there. The first two I'm going to talk about are not related necessarily to connections, but endorphins are related to the brief euphoria that masks physical pain. So that is when you're doing a workout at the gym. You might have heard of a runner's high. Personally, I've never experienced it, but it's basically what happens when the endorphins get released in response to pain. So if you're going through a workout or doing the running, and you go so far and so hard that your body starts to feel the pain from the running or from the workout with the weights, etc., and you're pushing your bodies to that limit, endorphins get released to mask that pain, and that goes to the brain and gives you a bit of a high and a bit of a brief euphoric feeling. Also, same as if you go in and have a cold shower in the morning, that's the sort of, you'll release the endorphins, and that will go into your mind. So that, and look, there's certainly nothing wrong with that, and that's why there's a lot of links even within the Balance to Life platform. You'll see linking physical exercise and your physical health to your mental health, and going and working out and things like that. So there's certainly nothing wrong with endorphins, and physical exercise is a good way to help with your mental health, but it's not something we're going to concentrate on today because it's not necessarily related to connections. The other one, which is loosely related to connections, I guess, but it's dopamine. So that's the I got it feeling. That is, it's a drug of pattern and pleasure. So it's where you learn something, where you gain an achievement, and you get that little short-term hit, and you think about it, and it's actually been linked, it's got a little bit of bad press because it's been linked to tech addiction. So you think about the little ping you get on Instagram or Facebook or whatever social media platform you're on when someone likes a post. Yeah, that's a little hit. That will give a little hit of a dopamine in your mind, so you'll feel good about that. Or when you're playing Candy Crush, now Candy Crush is not my game, I'm more Angry Birds sort of person, but when you're getting it on each level and you sort of feel that little achievement there, that's, you get that little hit of dopamine. Now, it's very addictive, but it's also very short term. Okay, so if you want to use that to really move yourself up that wellbeing spectrum, you might need to find you need to play 4 hours of Candy Crush or something like that, which is probably not the most productive way to spend your time. So it's, while dopamine's all well and good, and it's nice to get a little hit every now and again, and certainly when you're doing bigger things like you are solving a problem at work and things like that, dopamine will come in there. So it still has its place, but again, not really linked to connections, and not something that's as long lasting and sustainable as trying to concentrate on oxytocin and serotonin, which is what we're going to do from this point of view, because they're much more related to connections. So the first look at oxytocin, that's known as the hugging drug. So that's released when you engage in care relationships, have a loving community around you. Okay, so now, and it certainly does come from physical contact, but I don't, particularly in the COVID area, we don't want to sort of encourage too much physical contact, particularly in the workplace. So don't go around hugging everyone to get your oxytocin fix. But it comes literally from connecting with other people. Okay, so it comes from love, friendship and deep trust that you build, not only within your personal relationships, but obviously even within work relationships. And the easiest way to actually produce oxytocin is from the positive social interactions that you may have, again, within the workplace or outside of the workplace. And unlike dopamine, it's much more longer lasting. It's been linked to boost your immune system, has you better problem solvers. And again, like we talked about earlier, you're more resilient. You're more resilient when you're in that green zone. You're more resilient the more oxytocin you get in. That's why, because it will move you towards that green zone and that well-being spectrum. So if you think about it from the point of view of examples of where you would experience oxytocin, sharing a meal with someone, particularly if you've cooked the meal and you're watching them enjoy it, when you're working together on a project and you come to a positive conclusion of that project, giving and receiving of gifts. That's why, the person that gives the gifts generally gets as much out of it as the person receiving the gift, because there's a real connection there, particularly if you've chosen the right gift to give to someone. There's a real connection there that releases the oxytocin in your mind, and that's why you might be feeling much better about yourself. The other social chemical we're going to look at, which operates a little bit differently, is serotonin. That flows when you feel important. It comes from pride, loyalty, and a status. It's sort of the being seen chemical, if you like. You get it from a sense of accomplishment or recognition of others. So think about it from a team leader's point of view. If you are someone that leads others, if you motivate someone else to excel, you'll get the serotonin hit, and so will they, particularly if you recognize them for any good work that they've done. So you see, if you see the impact that you've had on someone doing a really good job and you acknowledge that, you're both going to get a bit of a hit of serotonin from that, because it's that being seen element of serotonin that'll trigger it in their mind, and then you'll see the impact you have, and that'll trigger the serotonin in your mind as well. So it's another way, and particularly with the Are You OK Day message too, it is another way to bring that person, move them person up the wellbeing spectrum, because just by you reaching out and connecting with someone, where your connection we've just spoke about with the oxytocin, if you've got a positive social interaction with that person, even if it's over the phone, that's going to release a little bit of oxytocin. And the serotonin is going to be like, oh, I've been seen. Someone has acknowledged, that I'm here and where I'm at in life. And even if it is or isn't sort of a problem that they're having, the fact that they've been seen and been acknowledged will release some serotonin and help them to move in a positive direction on that wellbeing spectrum. So looking at these closer now, so we want to look at a bit more closely about how we can produce these chemicals and how we can connect, and the importance again of connecting in 3 simple ways. So the first one here it talks about be proactive. Okay, so that is about, and I guess it's really a 2-pronged message, because it's about being proactive in our own selves. And this goes back to the original Are You OK Day message for this year, where we really want you to go and take the initiative yourself to go out there and make a positive connection with someone. But also understand, if you're in that sort of red zone of that wellbeing spectrum, it's important to be proactive at that stage and reach out to other people. But also our research, what we've sort of seen over the years, is when people are depressed, they may be a bit less likely to reach out. So that's when it is particularly important for other people to reach out to them and make sure that you're connecting with that person at the most critical of times. Now, I'm going to link you now to a conversation that we had with Ali Taylor. Now, Ali runs his own music-based mental health charity called Listen Up Music, but he's also the manager of wellness at Woolworths. And we spoke in the middle of COVID, and he sort of at that stage said he had a challenge for people within his team to go out and be proactive in the way that they connect. So I want you to have a listen to what Ali said now, and then I'll add a little bit more at the end of this clip.
And for me, that needs to change. I believe that in those situations, people should be proactively reaching out to people. And in this time, especially of social distancing and isolation, you don't know what anyone's going through at any time. And if you're not seeing them, you can't see any changes in their mood or their personality. So I've asked people in our community over the last couple of weeks to, reach out to 3 people in a week and just call some people and check in and see how they are.
As horrible as this is for. So Ali there says at the start that he says what something needs to change. The message that he has is actually very, very relevant to the 2021 message for Are You OK Day, because what he was saying there was, what needs to change is we're waiting for people to show signs of depression, and we're waiting for people to reach out to us and say, oh, if I hadn't known anything was wrong, I would have reached out to that person. He said, look, it's about being proactive and actually just reaching out to that person yourself. And it could be, again, going back to the sort of smiling depression, it could be anyone within your social network that you're reaching out to. So my action for you out of this, as in being proactive, is go and reach out to 3 people across the next week, as Ali just said there. And it's something that I did regularly anyway, whereas I'll just randomly go through my phone and pick out someone I haven't spoken to in a while and give them a call. Okay. And you'll be surprised how often that leads to a sort of reconnection with that person, and can lead to sort of a more meaningful mood ups, etc., down the track. Now, the worst thing that can happen is someone just looks at it and says, look, there's a reason I haven't spoken to Darren Clear in a while, and they don't answer. You move on to the next person. It's no problems. But if you're calling that person at the right time and they're going through something that you didn't even know about, then that can be a really powerful way of sort of implementing the Are You OK Day message. So the action for that is reach out to 3 people across the next week, and hopefully 3 people that you might not have spoken to in a while, and just connect with them and see how they're doing. Because again, it'll be good for you, it'll be good for them. And the worst, at the very least, you're going to have a little bit of oxytocin and serotonin released in the minds and move up in a more positive direction on that well-being spectrum. The second tip here on how to connect is to share stories. Now, this came up in another podcast. I'm not going to link to an audio from that podcast, but I certainly encourage you to have a listen to it. It was with Genevieve Hawkins. Now, Genevieve is the general manager insurance at Coles, and she also wrote her own book, Mentally at Work. And within that, I sort of asked Genevieve how she sets up a positive environment within her own workspace. And Genevieve is very much about showing vulnerability from herself and sharing stories from her own personal life to really encourage other people to reach out to her and encourage a connection on that on a very personal level with her as a manager and her team members. And I sort of took that on board and did something very similar for myself, where I shared a story amongst my own social network and amongst the professional network of people that I work with about my own personal story of having a transgender teen. My son, who used to be my daughter, is now 14. And I just shared the warts and all story of how we sort of got to that point. And it was amazing the feedback I got, which was all positive. And it also led to a few people within my social network said they're going through the same thing, which I didn't even know at that point. So it sort of led to a really positive back and forth between them and a much more meaningful connection than we probably already had them. And some of them were just sort of, Facebook friends only, if you like, that we sort of liked each other's posts every now and again and might say hello to if we saw each other. So it was a really positive outcome for me to do that. Now, you don't have to, now when I give you the action here of sharing some stories, it doesn't necessarily have to be something as personal as that, but certainly I would encourage you to try and share either a personal story, but at the very least a positive story, something from your work that you might have gotten right, a project that you've completed recently, some positive feedback you got from a client, whatever it might be. Share that with the rest of your team and share that amongst your workmates, and then encourage a conversation and a back and forth from that. And it will actually help you to connect across each other as a team in a more meaningful way. And if you'd start doing that on a weekly basis, as Genevieve does, you'll feel like there's a much more closeness within the team, and the team feels much more connected, and everyone's going to be in a much better place to perform at their best at all times. Now, the third part of this in how to connect is be genuine. So it's more, I guess, a tip on the way to connect with someone. And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier with the Are You OK Day message itself. So, excuse me, don't understand when you are connecting with someone around Are You OK Day, or really at any stage, it is important not to see yourself as, I'm reaching out because I want to reach out and I care about sort of connecting with you at this moment. Don't feel, I'm just reaching out to tick a box and, I heard that you were going through a tough time and I just wanted to check in and say you're okay. Like that's where I think you'll get it wrong, because people say, yes, I'm okay, and move on. Whereas if you're doing it from a genuine point of view, where you're just checking in with the person and you might be talking about anything else other than what's going on in their life, I think that's going to have a much more positive impact than just checking in and say, look, I'm only checking in because, I heard about A, B, C, or D. And look, but don't take my word for it. The reason I bring this up is the conversation that we had around Are You OK Day last year focused on Monique from Program Maintenance. And Monique's story was one that came to us where she was about to give birth to her son, and her son was going to have some complications with the birth. And because of COVID, that meant that she would not be able to spend any time with her son, because her son was going to have to go straight into the ICU. So once she'd given birth, she basically had to leave the hospital almost straight away, and then he was going to go into ICU. So this part of the conversation that we're linking to, sort of, I asked Monique to sort of go over, well, how would you want people to reach out to you, and why is it important for people to reach out to you during this very difficult period you've got coming up? And I wanted you to have a listen to what she said. As horrible as it is for me to have to say, it sounds like the worst might be yet to come in terms of what you're going through, in terms of how difficult it's going to be when you have your son and you're not able to see him as much as you'd obviously like, or as much as would be normal outside of COVID. What do you think other people can do? Because I think a lot of people would have a bit of a, that's a bit too difficult for me to deal with, and I wouldn't know what to say if I call Monique and ask how she's going. I mean, what sort of advice, I guess, would you have for people if they're being a bit hesitant to check in with you and see how you're going in the next sort of few months as you go through further difficult times?
Yeah, look, I know that the next, I suppose, 6 weeks are going to be the hardest of what we have gone through. Obviously, we didn't anticipate COVID when we went through IVF and that sort of thing. So all of this has been something very new to everybody, obviously, that's going through the same thing as me. And I'm not looking forward to it. I think I try and put it out of my mind as much as I can about, not being able to bond with our son together. And I think it will be the hardest part of this whole process. But everybody that knows me knows that I'm the most approachable person, and just their wishes and checking in on me and having a laugh, having some of the people or most of the people that I work with in my team and, my boss as well, ringing me up and just saying, how you going, and being able to have a laugh and, forgetting about that sort of everything else that's going on the outside of my life that's not work related. They know that's the best thing for me, and that's exactly what they do. So I think, for everybody else out there that is going through this as well, I feel, 100% for them. It's not a situation that I wish on anybody, but just, yeah, we've got to hang in there and I suppose roll with the punches and just know that, I suppose at the end of the day, we're safe. My son will be safe where he is, and just have to get through it as best we can.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, we often talk about the importance of showing gratitude to others, and it's a way of sort of building resilience within ourselves, of knowing that, or acknowledging that as bad as things might get, there can always be worse. And that you saw that from Monique there, and why she's such a resilient personality. It was such an inspiring conversation for me to have. But she's also right that the COVID situation that we're now in adds an extra layer on top. And it's a very, very difficult situation for so many people to be going through while we're in lockdown at the moment. So it is important. And as she said there, the connection and the reaching out is the important thing. It's not what you say. It's not, talking about the specific thing that's going wrong. It is just, how are you going? Have a laugh if that's the way that person sort of wants to react on that particular day. So that even if it's a frivolous conversation, I mentioned earlier the example about talking about fantasy football, it is the reaching out and connecting with someone that's the important thing, rather than the subject matter of what you might talk about, and the genuineness of your intentions in doing that. So that is the ways. So, and the last action, just to go back on that, the action that we want you to take there is to reach out to someone face to face. Now, obviously, under COVID at the moment, it's going to be a bit more difficult. Even if it's a Zoom meeting or something, and maybe I wouldn't be surprised if you're over Zoom meetings, but even if it's a brief thing like that, to just make that meaningful connection, and having someone face to face in front of you, even if it is over Zoom, just adds that little bit extra personal dimension to it. So, the first one, just to go over them again, reach out to 3 people the next week. The next one, share a story of your own life, personal or professional, with the rest of your team, and then try and reach out to someone face to face that you haven't been able to for a while, or particularly if you think they might be going through a bit of a tough period at the moment. And I'll give you another quick example from my own life. I know a friend of mine has an autistic child, and they've had to homeschool her over the last few weeks. So I've made a point of reaching out to him and just having a bit more of a meaningful conversation with him, just to make sure that, to see how things are going, because no doubt it would have been a very challenging last couple of weeks for him and his family. Now, the last couple of things here was the Are You OK? I referenced this at the start, the Smart Hub journey. So we will email you a link to that. They're going to be a Moments That Matter podcast as well, which will be within that. And I believe that is the one that we did with Monique. and really get you to think about what "Are you okay" means to someone that is not okay, and gain some insight on what we can do with that. So that'll be just like an extra a layer of learning and understanding that will come on top of this webinar today. So the final point I wanted to make, and the final quote that I wanted to leave you was too often that we underestimate the power of a touch, a smile, a kind word, a listening ear, an honest compliment, or the smallest act of caring, all of which have the potential to turn a life around, which is a nice way to leave it from before we get to questions, because that's really what the main message of Are You OK Day. You know, I said it earlier, but I wanted to leave you with this last thought. Do not underestimate the power of your support, and do not underestimate the importance of having a strong support network in place, not only for yourself, but for your wider network of family, friends, and indeed co-workers.